Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. It's time for questions for the Minister for Justice. We shall start with the listed questions. I call on Claire Sugden. Claire, over to you.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Question number 1.
The provision of emotional support animals within Northern Ireland Prison Service establishments is an operational matter for the Prison Service. It has been more than 20 years since the Service first introduced support dogs into the prison setting, and they are not aware of a single occasion when a dog has been placed at risk. Support dogs are highly valued and well cared for team members and have helped countless prisoners who have been in crisis. This is the same for all support animals within prisons. Everyday prison officers perform their roles with judgment, diligence and with care. I've been disappointed and surprised that others think these same officers are not up to the job of introducing an emotional support dog at McGilligan Prison. If a policy is required to satisfy the ongoing interests in all animals within prisons, I'm certain prison service and staff will have the measure of that task. However, that work will be appropriately prioritised among the many other challenges facing the service at this time, not least the rising prison population and the increasingly complex needs of that population. Legislative matters relating to animals are not the responsibility of my department.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and thank you, Minister. Minister, I think in respect of this particular dog, we made a mistake. That dog should not have been within the prison and didn't fall within the policy and legislation, which I do believe needs reviewed and updated. You've received correspondence as early as this morning, continuing to raise concerns in relation to how we dealt with this particular animal. Will the Minister give a commitment that this won't happen again and that she will review what's happening operationally within the Northern Ireland Prison Service? I appreciate it's not directly her responsibility, but it does fall directly within her remit.
Well, first of all, I have to say that I disagree entirely with the picture that has been painted by the member in terms of saying that the way that this was dealt with by Prison Service originally was wrong. I think what has been scandalous is the whipping up of false information, misinformation and disinformation in the public domain, both in terms of social media and the wider media. The truth is that when the dog was inspected in place, it was found to be in excellent condition, happy, well adjusted and enjoying the work that it was doing. And sadly, because of the hysteria whipped up outside, a threat was received regarding Bailey, and Bailey was removed from the prison for his own safety. Because let us be clear, the welfare and safety of the animals in our care are our primary concern in all of these matters.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Does the Minister not have any concern that after 20 years of putting dogs in prisons like this, there is no legislation, there is no definition of what emotional support dog is, there was no pre-suitability assessment done of that dog, and that there is just a made-up policy of putting a pet dog in prison without any safeguards? And that was confirmed to me by the Director General of Prisons in Northern Ireland and the Prison Governor of McGilligan.
I'd have to say
Minister.
that my greater concern is the amount of time that has been consumed by prison service staff in responding to an issue that was based on nothing but lies and smears. And in fact, the member himself had to admit in public that he hadn't even read the independent welfare report, despite tweeting consistently and persistently about the matter, I think for over 3 weeks. So I think if we want to be serious about our concern around animals, the first thing you would do is look at what the animal welfare experts said with respect to Bailey. They said he was a dog in excellent condition, well adjusted and well cared for. These are not working dogs in the traditional sense. The training that goes with them is to those prison officers who deploy them in certain circumstances. They are treated, for all intents and purposes, as a family pet would be treated. And that is why we're able to do this. And to say that there was no pre-assessment of suitability, again, factually incorrect. Because there was one issue around whether or not the dog was well socialised with men, and that was dealt with before the dog was selected and brought to the prison. So these are further facts, further misinformation and further inability to accept that when somebody gives you a response and it's a detailed and evidence-based one, that you actually have to take it into account.
Cara Hunter, I call on Cara Hunter.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and solidarity with you, Minister, following a mob at your house last week. We're all thinking of you. Just following up from previous questions there, can the Minister confirm whether or not emotional support animals, particularly dogs, receive any specific training before being placed in a prison? And if you're aware, the prison officers receive any kind of specific training regarding being assigned responsibility for caring for an animal during their period?
Prison officers, as I've just said, are trained in terms of deployment of the emotional support dog, which is pretty much like looking after any other dog in that environment. These are not dogs that are there for protection or for guarding or to work, for example, as sniffer dogs, where there is a particular skill engaged in terms of training the dog and a particular level of vigilance required of the dog. These are situations in which the dog is simply there to show companionship to those prisoners who are there. So the dogs don't need specific training, but they do need to have a particular temperament. So they have to be good around people, they have to be calm and assured, and Bailey fitted all of those categories. Sadly now, his life has been disrupted due to a threat received from outside the prison. Which I think if anybody actually cares about dogs and their welfare, they would not want to see a happy, well-adjusted and well-cared-for dog taken out of its routine environment.
Mark Durkin.
Question number 2.
Police powers around drinking in public in Northern Ireland derive from a mix of local bylaws and broader public order legislation. Councils can prohibit drinking in designated public areas by way of local bylaws made under the Local Government Act, Northern Ireland 1972. Consuming alcohol in these areas is an offence. Police can take an offender's name and address, however, prosecutions are brought by councils. The PSNI can address several alcohol-related public order offences via penalty notices for disorder provided for by the Justice Act 2011. This allows officers to quickly address offences such as being drunk in a public place, disorderly behaviour or conduct likely to cause a breach of the peace. In addition, the Confiscation of Alcohol Young Persons Act 1997 gives police the power to require those under 18 to surrender alcohol in public, with refusal constituting an offence. I am aware there is a desire that the legislative framework is updated, and as this is likely to be a cross-cutting issue, my department is working together with PSNI and the Department for Communities to ensure that it is fit for purpose, with a view to bringing forward legislation if needed in the next mandate.
Mr Durkin for a supplementary. Mark.
Thanks, Deputy Speaker. I'd also like to express solidarity with the Minister. Parts of Derry city centre at times now resemble the Wild West, with groups of vulnerable individuals drinking and engaging in antisocial behaviour. It's not only putting them at risk, but it's also impacting negatively on locals, tourists and the local economy. Police have lamented the lack of legislation that would permit them to confiscate alcohol from adults and believe that this would be a game changer in tackling this issue. Can the Minister update us on the work that she and her department are doing with others to close this legislative loophole?
Well, conversations with partners are ongoing at this point in time. The previous joint consultation with DFC on the issue indicated a strong desire for change. We're proposing providing PSNI officers with the additional power to seize and dispose of alcohol in exceptional circumstances, such as certain public order situations. We're also exploring whether any other agencies may wish to use enforcement powers, although it is important to note that any power of seizure would be limited to the PSNI. The overall aim is to deliver a modern, enforceable and proportionate framework that balances effective enforcement with individual rights and signposting to support services. There is no desire to penalise vulnerable individuals. However, as I said, this will be a cross-cutting matter given that the powers lie between legislation that we can create in the Department of Justice and also then work that can be done by the Department for Communities.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. May I ask the Minister to outline the role that policing and community safety partnerships have in tackling drinking in public and alcohol misuse?
Well, policing and community safety partnerships are jointly funded by my department and by the Policing Board, and they lead on the department's operational response to specific concerns at a local level. They're working with designated partners, local statutory bodies and agencies and the voluntary and community sector to tackle community safety issues right across the community. They can fund and support initiatives such as awareness campaigns, diversionary programmes for young people and local addiction initiatives. In a number of areas, PCSPs also help fund community safety wardens to help ensure our towns and cities are safe. Through those PCSPs, communities have a direct voice in shaping responses to alcohol misuse and ensuring that local concerns are reflected in practical actions.
Question number 3.
My department funds support services to assist all victims of crime on an equal basis. The entitlements and services that victims of crime in Northern Ireland can expect to receive from criminal justice organisations are set out in the Statutory Victim Charter. The Northern Ireland Courts and Tribunal Service is responsible for administrating the courts. It is impartial in upholding the rights of all to seek justice through the court system.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And I wish to put on record my utter condemnation of the incident which took place at the Minister's home last week, because there's no justification for this kind of intimidating behaviour, and private homes must be off limits. Can I thank the Minister for her answer? The Minister will know that the victims campaigner Anne Travers has asked for a public apology to innocent victims over the removal of the word innocent from the recent motion in this House. Does the Minister understand the hurt and the anger felt by innocent victims' families, and will she take this opportunity to apologise?
Well, I do certainly understand the hurt that is felt by victims' families, and I understand the sensitivity of the issue, which is why it's particularly disappointing that there has been so much politicking, particularly around the interview I gave after the event, which has been thoroughly and deliberately misrepresented in terms of what I said. So to put on record for reassurance what I actually said in terms of the difference between victims, I'm going to read part of it that was curiously edited out of what was shared on social media. It doesn't change the moral authority around whether or not what somebody did was right or wrong. That's unquestionable. If people were doing things that were wrong, they should be held to account for that, and we're clear about that. So hopefully that provides the reassurance that members and indeed families are looking for, that nothing we did in that debate, that nothing we voted for or against in that debate in any way changes our view that those who go out with intent to cause harm should be held accountable for their actions, and that there is no moral equivalence between those who go out to cause harm and those who are harmed by their actions. What I was simply pointing out is a matter of fact, that at different points in a person's life, they can be both a victim and a perpetrator. And that when it comes to support, for trauma-informed support, it is important that we do that based on what will lead to reconciliation, on what will lead to recovery, and what will end the cycle of intergenerational trauma which blights this community.
Thank you. Minister, could you please outline the support that your department provides for victims of sexual offences?
Well, in terms of the general work that we do in terms of supporting victims, we provide over £2.4 million in funding to ensure that victims and witnesses of crime can access the support services they need. Those services are delivered by Victim Support NI and the NSPCC Young Witness Service. Through the witness support services, victims and witnesses get emotional support, information, practical assistance, and that helps them give their best evidence. That includes opportunities to visit court before giving evidence, an explanation of the court process, accompanying the victim or witness into the courtroom or live link room or remote evidence centre, and offering the opportunity to talk to someone when that case has ended. In addition, for those who are victims of specific sexual offences, we obviously also have the sexual offences legal advisors and child sexual offences legal advisors who can give pre-court and pre-trial legal advice to victims to help guide them through the many requests that they will face around issues such as disclosure.
Minister, you mentioned ending the cycle of intergenerational trauma. What about ending the trauma being experienced by victims who were maimed and attacked in their own homes by the IRA and who are not able to access the pension scheme because they were maimed and attacked by members of their own community? What's your assessment of that reality and how that levels with the ability to end the intergenerational trauma and the trauma experienced by the victims?
Well, the issue of how people were treated, and particularly the case of paramilitary-style attacks, is one where I have raised the issue with the UK Government already in writing, and also with the President of the Victims Payment Board, because I believe that shootings and beatings that are taken on by paramilitary organisations, whether they are intra-community or inter-community, need to be addressed in the same way. That is unfortunately not how the legislation suddenly sits. It would require an amendment at Westminster. However, I have raised my concerns about the differentiation between those victims who were beaten by people who ostensibly came from the same community versus those who were beaten by people who were viewed to be from a different community.
Christopher Cahir, Littlehill, question 4.
There is no place in society for this type of hate. Every person, every family, regardless of religion or background, is entitled to feel safe and free from threat or intimidation. My department is engaged in a wide range of work to respond to sectarian hate attacks, to strengthen support for victims of hate crime, or where people feel vulnerable to attack, whether at home, in school, at work or on our streets. What is always evident is that sectarianism, racism and paramilitarism do not help our communities. Paramilitary organisations are an unwanted relic of a troubled past and hold no legitimacy. As I've said many times before, they should disband and allow our communities to move forward. It can be difficult to draw a direct evidential line between paramilitary groups and hate crimes, but let's be clear, communities know what is going on and who is involved. They feel it and see it, and that speaks to the coercion that paramilitary organisations and those who are linked to them still choose to force on people and communities who want nothing to do with racism and hate. Legislative provisions within the Sentencing Bill and Victims and Witnesses of Crime Bill will modernise our hate crime law in Northern Ireland and provide a more robust system to sanction offenders. Direct support for victims of sectarian hate crime is provided through the Hate Crime Advocacy Service, which supports victims through the criminal justice process and signposts them to relevant support services. Sectarianism and racism are two sides of the same coin. The work of PCSPs includes actions to tackle hate crime at that local community level. The question of addressing sectarian hate is, however, not solely the role of my department. It also requires sustained cross-governmental action beyond the criminal justice system if we're to prevent harm occurring. We all need to redouble our efforts, not just to tackle hate crime, but the attitudes and language that are the root causes of hate and prejudice, and also to promote more positive community relations proactively.
To begin by sending my solidarity to the Minister and to her husband after the incident outside your home, which was completely wrong and should never have happened. So our thoughts are with you today. I thank the Minister for her answers so far. And I suppose, Minister, what we're hearing from people is that when they report these crimes, there's often little or no outcome, and that's quite worrying for them. So what can be done to make that process more accessible and to ensure that sectarian behaviour, wherever it emanates from, is challenged?
Well, I think, like many other crimes that are committed by cowards under cover of darkness to intimidate and threaten, it can be very, very difficult to identify the individual perpetrators and the actors in those situations. But I would encourage people to continue to report, because those patterns of reporting can in themselves help the PSNI when it comes to deciding where they're going to deploy resources, where needs more attention in terms of protection of the public, and what might be able to be done. It is important that people do report crime, because without those reports we are unable to actually measure what is happening. And I understand the concerns that the member will have given the rate of hate crime in his own city, and the concerns that he will have particularly about the increase in sectarian hate crime. It is not acceptable. It is completely unacceptable in today's society that people still find themselves intimidated because of who they are or how they are perceived by others. And unless we are all consistent in that message and unwavering in our condemnation, there is no point in us telling victims to have any kind of confidence in the system which ultimately we are the face of.
Mr. Carroll. Jerry.
Deputy Speaker, I want to extend my best wishes to the Minister and her husband Michael as well on what happened last week, which was disgusting. Minister, in a general sense, I'd like to ask your assessment of how closely far-right and paramilitary groups are working together in unison to harass people, to intimidate people. You said obviously sectarianism and racism are two sides of the same coin. I believe that's right, and I believe those who perpetrate one are doing the same. So any assessment of how they're working together? Thank you.
Well, I know that the PSNI have conducted an assessment of this, and their assessment is that whilst there are individuals who are connected to existing paramilitary organisations engaged and active in a number of these protests, there is less evidence that would substantiate any claim that they are orchestrating or organising those protests. In addition to those, I suppose, more traditional actors in this space, we also have groups of people who are being radicalised online by far-right organisations and networks there. And they're often lone actors, people who do not have a network of support, traditional base in Northern Ireland, but are being activated online and are then finding their community online and acting in that sense. So I think that there are two separate dynamics which are happening, particularly with far-right threat. It is far more likely that somebody will be individually radicalised in the privacy of their own home than radicalised in a more public way. But undoubtedly, both will take to the streets and both will use a degree of muscle in terms of trying to intimidate either those who themselves are vulnerable in the community or those who dare have the audacity to speak up on their behalf.
Deputy Speaker, and it was interesting to hear the Minister speak about the tightness of resources in the context of we've heard in the last day that the PSNI has opened a hate crime investigation into the damage of the sign at Shandon Park. Can we be assured that there will now be similar investigations across the country into any similar damage to signs, including by the PSNI's own initiative?
Well, I think the damage in the street signs in general is one of the most petty and childish acts that a person can undertake. If you can't drive past a sign that you don't like without feeling the need to take an angle grinder to it or a bucket of paint to it, I think you need to have a long, hard look at yourself. But I won't be providing any assurance in this chamber as to how the PSNI will prioritise investigations, because, as you will be well aware, it is a matter for the Chief Constable to direct the resources of the PSNI, not for me as Minister.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Minister, it goes without saying that I and my party stand in solidarity with you. Democracy means you being robustly held to account in this chamber. You were more than able to deal with that in this chamber, but what happened was contemptible. A family home is sacrosanct, so we stand in solidarity with you. In relation to sentencing provisions coming forward in the bill, are you and your officials looking at the intersection between racism and the continued prevalence of paramilitarism? Will there be an attempt to create compound, as it were, sentencing provisions, aggravating factors for membership of prescribed organisations? And what do you think the message is being sent by continued engagement with by your ministerial colleagues from organisations like the Loyalist Communities Council?
Well, in terms of intersectionality, it is something that it forms part of the hate crime legislation that we hope to bring forward, and there will be aggravators there where a hate crime motive for the signal offence can be proven. We will also obviously prosecute those as standalone offences in order that if the hate crime motivation cannot be proven, a person can still be held accountable for the act, the crime that they undertook. When it comes to the issue of membership of paramilitary organisations, membership of a paramilitary organisation is a criminal offence. It can be prosecuted, and there are jail terms available in legislation for that to happen. And if somebody is arrested for a hate crime and are also able to be proven to be membership of members of a paramilitary organisation, there's nothing to preclude the two offences being taken through the court together, as would be the case in other circumstances where somebody is arrested for an offence, but there is also a paramilitary link to the crime. We will also be bringing forward through the current bill additional means of sentencing and additional offences around organised crime, both participating in and directing organised crime, which I think is also important, because whilst all of the paramilitary organisations have a finger in organised crime, not all organised crime organisations are involved in paramilitarism, and we just need to untangle all of that, so it's important that we look at those as well. But I think when it comes to my views on the legitimisation of illegal groups by these kinds of engagements, whether it's by other ministers or whether it's by an interlocutor appointed by two governments, I think I've been fairly clear that I think it's unhelpful. I think the community, their confidence is shaken when they see people being treated as the spokespeople for a community, and they see them very much as a jackboot on their own neck.
Question 5, please.
The Criminal Damage Compensation Scheme provides important financial support to victims where there has been physical damage to a property or vehicle in Northern Ireland, and where it can be shown that damage was caused unlawfully, maliciously or wantonly by an unlawful assembly of 3 or more people, or maliciously by a person acting in connection with an unlawful association like an act of terrorism. Compensation may also be payable for agricultural property or property which is free from rates if the damage was caused maliciously or deliberately. Most commercial insurance policies should cover businesses for damage to their premises, including interruption to business operations. Some policies will also cover those businesses which are not damaged, but whose trade has been affected in the aftermath. Where insurance is in place, companies will be available to provide immediate support to victims of criminal damage. If unable to secure support from an insurer, the Criminal Damage Compensation Scheme provides an important source of assistance for those victims. As with all schemes, it is important to keep them under review, and consideration is being given to the need for any changes to the scheme to ensure that it meets the needs of victims. Any proposals for change would, of course, be subject to consultation.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and can I echo the comments of others, Minister, to say our thoughts are with you. What happened last week was totally disgraceful and unacceptable. Minister, in my constituency in the last 18 months, several people who I'm representing have been victims of confirmed hate crime. Their property has been damaged, the incidents have been deeply traumatising, but when they've gone to seek compensation, as you alluded to in your answer, they were unable to claim that compensation because the police could not confirm that 3 or more people were involved in that hate crime. That is unacceptable. A hate crime is a hate crime regardless of how many people are involved. Will you look at maybe changing this policy in order for those people to be able to claim compensation where it arises? Thank you.
Well, the member makes a point that I understand because it's one that's been raised with me before. However, we have to go back to what the purpose of the compensation scheme was, and it was for a time when often businesses and individuals were unable to get insurance because of the level of property damage being inflicted during the terrorist campaign here. And so compensation service was designed to deal with those sorts of incidents as opposed to simple criminal damage or even simple hate crime offences. So in terms of, for example, the civil disorder in Ballymena, 27 claims were submitted to compensation services. In relation to those, 1 claim has been paid, 1 applicant has withdrawn, 15 are awaiting police reports, and 10 are awaiting further documentation that needs to be there to support the claim. We do all we can within compensation services to progress those claims as expeditiously as possible. However, when you're waiting for police reports and information from the applicant or further evidence, such as deeds, insurance information, and any business interruption information, that's often outside of our control. There will be some of the cases that will not meet the threshold of 3 or more, but it is meant to be in Radis Assembly, and therefore if it's not proven that that was the case when it happened, it would be down to the individual insurer for that particular business or home to step into that space.
Question 6, please, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
The most recent PSNI bulletin published on the 20th of August shows that in the 12 months to the 30th of June 2025, there were 29,740 domestic abuse incidents and 18,246 domestic abuse crimes recorded. This represents decreases of almost 7% and 5.5% respectively compared with the previous year. While these reductions may appear encouraging, they should be treated with caution. Recorded statistics reflect only those cases that were reported to the police, and reporting can be influenced by a range of factors, including whether victims feel able to come forward and have confidence in the system. A fall in recorded incidents and crimes does not necessarily mean that domestic abuse is happening less frequently. What is clear is that domestic abuse continues to take place on a significant scale. Tackling it cannot be achieved by the Department of Justice alone. It will require a cross-executive and community-wide response if we are to prevent abuse, protect victims and ultimately reduce the harm caused across society. The Domestic and Sexual Abuse Strategy provides us with a cohesive direction, enabling necessary change to be brought forward through partnership working.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And like others, I send my best to the Minister and her husband following the absolutely appalling attack outside their home, and offer my continued support to the Minister and her strong work against abuse of elected representatives, in particular female elected representatives. Minister, in light of these figures recently at the All-Party Group on Domestic and Sexual Violence, it was expressed with concern from a number of the support groups, and you've touched on this, that the reporting of the numbers of reduced offences by the PSNI are setting a picture that things have reduced, whereas the agencies and groups like Women's Aid are reporting higher numbers of self-referrals. Minister, is there any forum by which we can bring these different support groups together alongside the PSNI to paint a full picture of what's actually happening here?
Well, it is difficult because obviously the bulletin itself is only looking at reported incidents and reported crime, but we all know that there will be instances where those crimes are not reported, and many victims, for good reason, will choose not to present to the PSNI. And whilst I would always encourage people to report crime, I understand the complexities of doing that in a domestic violence setting. Most people, their priority is simply to extract themselves and their loved ones from what is a dangerous situation. We do have the opportunity through the work that we do with community and voluntary sector partners to be able to get some sense of what direction of travel there is, but it would be hard, I think, to quantify that in a way that would be robust enough to provide kind of formal statistics in that space. But it is something that we will continue to explore with our partners, because again, we know that there will be underreporting for a number of reasons, and even those who go and make initial contact with those charitable organisations may not then follow through later on, and some of those
Minister,
contacts may be...
Minister, could you draw your remarks to close? Thank you.
Some of those reports may be as a result of other family members who are raising concerns.
Thank you. That ends the period for listed questions. We now move on to 15 minutes of topical questions. Topical question number 2 has been withdrawn. I call on Patsy McClone. Patsy.
Minister, just at the very start, I would like to condemn outright the disgraceful behaviour outside your home. For any of us who have been in politics for a while and have seen intimidation, crime of this nature, it is abysmal that this should be happening to you, an elected representative, outside your home, which should be private to us all. So solidarity with you, but also outright condemnation for those thugs who stood there and tried to intimidate you as you go about your normal daily work. Minister, just on that, you mentioned earlier, and listened carefully, as to the types of measures that could be taken by your department and indeed in collaboration with other departments to help tackle the scourge of extremism, often manifesting itself as right-wing, often manifesting itself as sectarian and racist. How do you see both the increase in sentencing and the collaboration with other departments panning out?
I think there are two elements to this. I think first and foremost, the degree to which sentencing is a true deterrent is questionable, because most people who commit crime never consider being caught. Many of them do things in the spur of the moment without giving any due regard to what their outcomes might be, and many are completely reckless with respect to their own behaviour. And I hear people chuntering from the sidelines that it's nonsense, but actually, if you talk to those in the legal profession, they'll tell you that actually that is part of the problem. However, I believe that with the right sentence and framework in place, we can show when these cases come to court that we are serious about tackling it, and I think that is an important message. The law will not change people's minds, but it will change their behaviours over time. What we need to do, however, is identify much earlier, before harm has been caused, the issues that are being used to radicalise individuals, the means and methods that are being used to radicalise individuals, and seek to intervene much earlier in the chain before those individuals themselves become radicalised and end up undertaking actions that will bring themselves into conflict with the law and place others in the way of harm.
Thank you for that, Minister. And yes, sentencing is one part of it. You mentioned there the radicalising of individuals. Could you maybe just elaborate a wee bit further as to how you see your department, perhaps working with other UK departments, to try and stymie the influence, particularly of social media, on radicalising people who previously may well not have been radicalised and got themselves into the mess that they've got themselves into?
Well, the online harms bill is but one of the tools available, and obviously my own department have made representations to the Home Office, who lead on communications and telecommunications, because obviously that's a reserved matter, but we continue to feed in our concerns in this space. We also, through the Tackling Paramilitarism programme, are about to trial some desistance programmes for people who have already been radicalised into either paramilitary or organised crime, but who we believe are still reachable and teachable in that space, and how we can actually get alongside them and start to change their attitudes and offer them an alternative route forward at the very earliest stage of conflict with the justice system. So that's one of the things we can do. We're also looking to what is available in other places in terms of the suite of interventions that are available where young young people become radicalised. Where this differs from the traditional radicalisation that we've seen in our community over many years is that those individuals tend to be lone actors. They tend to be radicalised in their own home, and therefore it's only when their behaviours reach a certain level of danger that they will be alerted, that we will become alert to their involvement, or alternatively when they've actually undertaken an offence, which makes it slightly more complicated to address. But one of the things that we will need, obviously, is not just for my department, but for education, health and others, to look at this as part of our wider safeguarding approach, because the other thing to say is that many of these are very young people who are being radicalised.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can the Minister provide an update on her plans to uplift criminal legal aid fees by 16%?
Yes, I remain committed to delivering the uplift to remuneration that I set out in the Chamber in December last year. Officials across the Department are continuing to progress the business case with the Department of Finance, which covers the wider Enabling Access to Justice programme, not just the increase in legal aid fees. Progression of the business case was delayed to enable further amendments to legal aid fees that have been developed through the Criminal Legal Aid Working Group, established in March to be included in this round of change, and was further impacted as officials had to react to some emerging issues impacting on the wider reform programme. However, once that business case is complete, I expect the legislation to be brought forward immediately and to come into effect within 6 weeks, respecting that legislative process. In anticipation of the introduction of those new rates, the Legal Services Agency has updated its case management system to ensure the increases to fees can be claimed as appropriate from the date the fees come into operation. And they are also looking at how they will then be able to process, without requiring application from the practitioners, the additional back payments that I have promised to the December date of last year.
Thank the Minister for that update. Could you provide a further update on the progress in increasing the fee payable under the County Court scale?
The County Court Rules Committee has proposed a 23% increase to fees under the County Court scale to address inflation eroding their value since 2017. The proposed amendments have undergone consultation, economic appraisal and policy screening with no anticipated impact. The draft rules are subject to negative resolution procedure and are scheduled to be considered by the Justice Committee on the 16th of October. Pending the outcome of that, we will then take them forward as is appropriate.
Thank you much, Deputy Speaker. Unlike others today, can I condemn outrightly what happened at your house last week? It seems that things have been stooped to a new low. It's not the first in terms of attack of politicians, but it absolutely condemn it outright. Minister, in terms of policing, quite a lot of us are now starting to receive correspondence from police officers in terms of this year's pay rise. Can you give an indication of when that's likely to conclude?
Minister. Well, like other ministers, the Department of Health and the Department of Education, we also have a projected overspend. There's a deficit of around 23 million for PSNI, and until we have a plan in place to deal with that, it is deemed unaffordable, though it has been approved in terms of value for money business case. What I'm trying to do at the moment is to work through that with the other colleagues in the executive so that there is a consistent approach to pay. I set aside 3.5% for pay at the start of the year in order to ensure that that money would be available. However, the result of recommendations that came to me, which were between 1 and 1.5% higher than that, meant that there is still a shortfall. I know some other departments didn't set aside anything for pay. That's ring-fenced at the start of the year. We did do that, but we will still have a challenge in terms of affordability. But the contractual element of the pay has gone ahead as it should at the start of October, and I would be hopeful that we will be able to get to a point where we will be able to pay the rest of the pay this as soon as possible, as I say, subject to affordability. And we will also be starting, sadly, next year's pay round pretty soon as well, so that we would hopefully be able to move that forward.
Can I thank the Minister for that answer, and a note from your answer, unlike other departments, you did set aside the 3.5%, but is that included in the £23 million overspend, or is that money still protected? And when likely do you see the likely outcome for those officers in terms of that pay rise?
Well, the money was set aside in ring fence at the beginning when I was budgeting, which is why at the beginning I had quite limited budgetary concerns and have had to take some fairly difficult decisions to live within budget. My overspend is entirely one at the moment, pretty much that's been projected within PSNI, so that's where the majority of the overspend in DOJ is happening. And we're working with PSNI in order to try to find ways of managing that overspend, in order that we've already reduced it by about half, and we would need to reduce it further still for the Department of Finance to judge it to be affordable. But look, I will continue to work with colleagues to find a way through, because I believe that just because police officers and indeed prison officers don't go on strike doesn't mean that they should be any less worthy of receiving their pay when it's due. They do a difficult job. They should be remunerated fairly.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Could I ask the Minister for an update on her Speeding Up Justice programme?
Yes, the programme is an example, I think, of cross-justice collaboration to try and resolve what is a key issue. Criminal Justice Board has all of the senior leaders within the justice system, and they've prioritised this particular programme of work. It takes a whole system approach, focuses on reducing avoidable delay, reducing demand, freeing up capacity, facilitating more proportionate and effective responses to offending behaviour, and also aims to take advantage of technological developments to improve operational processes and communication between criminal justice organisations. Funding of £20.5 million from the Public Sector Transformation Board is enabling that work to progress in relation to early engagement and out-of-court disposals, and there are regular updates to the Criminal Justice Board as well as interim updates to the Programme Board itself around how we are making progress. Given the existing financial pressures, that funding is a boost and will enable us to do some essential work to progress efforts and to reduce avoidable delay. So part of that will be the work that we're doing around collating responses to the out-of-court disposals consultation. We'll be publishing the findings of that and recommendations in due course. And there's an early engagement project which has seen the commencement of a Gateway initiative to seek to enhance communication and file preparation quality between PSNI and PPS at the earliest point in a case, and also working towards a pilot of new case management processes for courts. And then work is continuing in relation to the implementation of a second phase of committal reform, direct committal, which is planned for November 2026. There is still a lot more to be done, but what we are seeing in terms of departmental statistics, the average or median time taken for a case to be dealt with from the date the offence is reported to police is 189 days in the most recent bulletin. That was an 8.3% improvement over the past 2 years and will be a key measure of how the system is performing overall, and a sign that efforts to speed up justice are having an impact.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and thanks to the Minister for that answer. Can the Minister provide an assessment of the impact that budgetary pressures are having on justice system transformation?
Well, there is a long-standing and ongoing funding challenge for justice, and I think it's well recognised by everyone in this House because I repeat it frequently enough. It will undoubtedly impact on what we can deliver. The DOJ share of the Northern Ireland Block Grant has fallen continually over the last 14 years, from just under 11% in 2011-2012 to just over 8% in 25-26. That underfunding hampers our efforts to do transformation, as funding is quite rightly prioritised to demand-led frontline activities, including policing, prisons and courts. So we have less than 0.5% of discretionary spend, which makes it increasingly difficult for us to be able to engage in that kind of system-wide transformation. There is an appetite, however, for change right across the justice system, and so bids to initiatives such as the Public Sector Transformation Board are crucial, because that will allow us to fulfil that appetite, to actually fund some of those endeavours and hopefully make further savings into the future if we can make those changes. We all recognise around the Criminal Justice Board table that there needs to be transformation for us to be more effective and efficient, and so that investment now will actually help us to save money in the future.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And Minister, may I, like others in this House, express my solidarity with you and condemnation of what happened at your home last week. Minister, I know that you are committed to the strategy of ending violence against women and girls, but we have had a huge number of women murdered in Northern Ireland. Many of those cases have taken a very long time to come to court. Is there anything practical that can be done to ensure that families who have suffered the most awful of harms in the death of their loved ones see justice, the process at an earlier stage?
Well, I've just set out the work we're doing in terms of speeding up justice, and one of the particular reasons that we're looking, for example, to changes in the jurisdiction of the courts, as well as more out-of-court disposals for those lower level offences, is in order to ensure that court time at the High Court is preserved for those most serious of offences, which would allow us hopefully to move more swiftly. Committal reform, for example, has already delivered hugely for victims of sexual offences and domestic abuse cases, whereby they don't have to give evidence potentially twice, which is a deterrent to people coming forward. We've also used the Remote Evidence Centre. There's a judge-led pilot there which has domestic abuse contest cases heard in the Remote Evidence Centre, and in the first tranche of 8 cases that went through, all 8 victims turned up, all 8 victims gave evidence, and all 8 perpetrators were happy to concede guilt at the outset. So just by being there, by having the confidence to come to court, they pled guilty. And we have seen that repeated. So the conviction rate at those domestic abuse contest cases where victims are able to give remote evidence, the success rate there is well over 90% conviction. So I think that there are things that we're doing which both speed up justice but also make the process itself a better process. Finally, with the case of domestic homicides, and every domestic homicide is a tragedy.
Thank you, Minister. Could you draw your remarks to a close?
I will. We are also looking at domestic homicide reviews, and I'm happy to provide the member with further information on that.
Not at the moment. Minister, just before we wait for the new Minister to come on, first of all, I'd like to put on my personal on record my personal thoughts to you and Michael, and particularly the horrible attacks on your home, and that should not be on anybody's case. And indeed, I think it's very important we recognise that. The second one is on a slightly lighter note. There seems to be an acoustic anomaly in the chamber today, and yes, you too, my sort of esteemed members from the SDLP, please be aware that from that particular corner, your voices do carry and they can interfere with other members, but you do have ample